Hi all, let's have a look at Nimzo against Saemich now from Carlsbad 1929. So Nimzo plays a kind of reverse Nimzo in a way. He plays b3 here, as if he's playing the black side of Nimzo, because now we follow with e3, and now bishop b5. So this does look like Nimzo Indian in reverse. The Nimzo-Larsen attack is often with f4 as well to save time, rather than relying on a knight move and then moving again at some point and then playing f4. This game features f4 later. If we look way back, there's similar game patterns to this, with this bishop kind of menacing sometimes on this diagonal against black's king. Lasker's had some great successes with this kind of system. Curiously putting his bishop here actually on d3, and we see some key Lasker gains with this knight maneuver, and like with f4 as well. So the patterns here are not completely original for playing this fianchetto system. So there's elements of dark square pressure and grip. There isn't an element of double pawns. Black plays bishop d7, avoiding double pawns. Okay, so we have knight f3, which, as I mentioned, maybe f4 is also an interesting move to consider. In blitz chess, I've actually been playing this setup with the bishop on d3 with great success in bullet, but the way I've been playing it is actually with f4, d4. So when bishop d3 happens, I'm not continually worried about black playing d4, because if you have this pawn structure, d4 is often a major issue actually. D takes e, and you're getting your pawn structure wrecked a lot of the time, and black's getting a lot of pressure. Basically, that's a great undermining point. So sometimes I like to have just a hole on e4, play with d4, f4 and bishop d3, and I'm getting really good attacks with a nice knight on e5 and potential for c4s later as well. But anyway, in this game, so knight f3, queen c7, castle's now knight f6, and Nimzo plays d3, so he's building up for e4 actually, like in a reverse Nimzo. So the game we've just previously seen, it's an interesting kind of reversal here. He's prepared obviously to give up that light square bishop to get a bit more influence on e5. After e6 there's no need at the moment. Knight bd2, and now he voluntarily actually gives up c6, so not waiting for a6 like in Nimzo, not waiting for a3 from white. So he just takes on c6 here and now establishes his knight, which releases the f-pawn ready to support that knight on e5. So we've got a dark square grip strategy and also an attacking strategy, an outright attacking strategy. Although against the game against Juve we saw wasn't that particularly successful, this is a more convincing demonstration of this kind of reverse kind of Nimzo setup. So bishop e8, seemingly solid move, bishop covering f7, and black, although it looks awkward, that's sometimes a useful move, but at the moment it is hemming in that rook on f8. Okay, rook f3, the rook's swinging in quite naturally for an attack. Rather crude, and maybe this shocks you, this side of Nimzo. He was not only sometimes, he has the strategic armory to strategically crush people, to remove their counterplay, but there's also these other sides of his play, I believe. Very good tactician, very aggressive sometimes against the opponent's kings, very strong use of dark square strategies, as well as overprotection, particularly on e5. So knight d7 here, and now just rook g3, which actually, although it's crude, it provokes weaknesses. It's an engine recommended move in this position. And after g6, there's a fantastic line here, which I don't think has been mentioned at Chess Games com, for example, and I checked it with Ribka earlier. In the game, Nimzo played queen g4, but there's actually something which can lead to something quite spectacular here. All we've got is this bishop and rook, and this queen access to the king side at the moment, to these two squares. So Nimzowitz's queen g4, maybe it can be improved with queen h5, and here is a fantastic variation which I checked out. So f6, say the knight retreats, and black plays this seemingly natural thematic move that I previously mentioned, d4. Okay, white in this position doesn't have to panic yet about e3. Can let e3 go because it can, you know, there's always knight c4s to try and get this pawn back. But you can actually play queen h3 here. And here, if d takes, not queen takes e6 because then bishop f7 and e takes d. So the knight moves. Now say knight b6. Now again, not queen e6, but here there's an absolutely stunning idea which an engine spotted, in inverted commas, as they spot things. I wonder if you can spot it if I give you 10 seconds starting from now. And if you can, you're an amazing tactician. So you're halfway there to being like Nimzo-Larsen. So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, knight g5. Now this creates the windmill tactic, which is where you're sort of checking the opponent, winning material, coming back to checkmate like a windmill. Because after f takes, I wonder if you can carry on this combination if I give you 10 seconds. Queen takes h7. King takes. Now the check. Check again. And now here, if I give you 10 seconds to look at this. Okay, I hope you didn't say knight e5. No, you want to get the windmill, so rook h7. And you get a repeat loop of checks here. Highly destructive. This is one of the most destructive tactics available, this windmill, with rook and bishop here on this lethal diagonal. So king h8, rook takes e7. So, but here it's all that's needed is to win bishop and queen. Big advantage to white, huge advantage to white. So that's an interesting idea that queen h5 might be more accurate here to justify this dark square grip and this bishop pointing right at black's king side. Okay, so queen g4 was played. After bishop f6, overprotection, knight coming to support e5, but also direct, threats against the black king, h7 and f7 being vulnerable. After bishop g3, another crude looking move, rook h3. So we can say that my system at the moment is partially about hacking opponents to death on the king side. That's part of my system, really, if we were to closely look at Nimzo's games, or trying to, without having one's pawn structure totally wrecked and one's own king being exposed. So here, Saemich is not doing as well as Juve, we could say. After f5, we have queen h4, so direct threats that have to be dealt with. Queen h7 and queen e7 as an infiltration threat. After knight f6 instead of h5, well, h5 allows the infiltration, so maybe that's why it was avoided, because what does black do about e6? Can't defend with bishop f7 because of the knight pin. That's pretty horrible. Queen moves, knight takes d7, so this would be a terrible infiltration. So that's why black's had it here. After knight f6, just knight g5, actually forking e6 and h7. Black's in real trouble. After h6, he's losing the exchange now at the very least. But Nimzo, like Fischer later, prefers the bishop instead of the rook because he wants to tear apart black's king safety. He actually plays knight takes g7. Confident enough in his position here, with this huge bishop on the diagonal, trying for positional strategy. I'm sure he'd want to play moves more on positional grounds than just materialism. So knight g4. Queen g5. There's a lot of threats just building up here, like knight takes g4 maybe, but at the moment there's queen takes b2. Okay, so maybe the simpler just h3 might also be a threat. So black actually took on e5. Bishop takes e5. Opposite coloured bishops, but in these sorts of positions where there's pressure on the king side, that favours the person with the opposite coloured bishops. So bishop f7, picking up another pawn now after that, the weakness of the last move, which was blocking f5. But I think black's defensive possibilities here are starting to be quite limited. After this c4 move, I mean, it's causing more central pressure and undermining. Black has no access for rook d8, and if he's giving up the centre with d takes, then b takes and more lines are being opened up. Maybe d4, d5, crack a pass pawn in the centre. So black's just cracking up actually. So queen takes f5. He takes on c4. and rook f8, but it's starting to be really hopeless. Queen e4, hitting b7, also preparing f5 in some lines, but now actually d4, just cementing that nice bishop on e5. C takes, e takes. Black's just sitting here helplessly now, losing another pawn, 3 pawns down. Bit of a crush, really, you could say. A complete triumph of the opening in this example, as in massive contrast to the Juve game. Queen b4, black resigned. So let's have a look at that in overview and summary again. So b3, a system I've been playing a lot in Blitz and Bullet recently, but with a different idea of f4, knight f3, d4, bishop d3. Lasker used to play this position with knight f3, bishop d3, knight c3 to e2 to g3. Different ways of playing it. It's like a reverse Nimzo engine, but we don't have the double pawn aspect. We have the aspect of dark square grip, bishop pressurizing the diagonal, try and control this e5 square, try and swing a rook rather crudely into the attack once f4 has been played. So these kind of elements make it, I think, a very dangerous weapon if you want to try it in blitz chess. Instead of the usual d4 and e4, you could go a bit hyper modern. I mean, Larsen, the great Larsen who passed away recently, he was playing this Nimzo-Larsen attack. That's why it got its name. So if you want to look at Larsen games, he was one of the most successful Western players in the 70s. Playing board one above Fischer in the USSR versus rest of the world match. That was played in around 1970. So bishop g7. So this rook h3, rather crude but just effective. How does black defend h7 without compromising his position too much? It starts to be really difficult. So this queen h4 was a real killer because of this knight g5 now, and the rest is just all black just getting dismantled here, basically just losing pawn after pawn. So white's really getting a massive grip on the centre and a really dominant dislodgeable bishop on e5, leading to this position. So we saw also that beautiful variation. Let's have a look at that one again. This queen h5 idea, with the idea of that f6 is not so harmful, because there's always this tactical idea coming up in this line of knight g5. What a stunner of an idea, hitting e6 and h7. So fg, beautiful queen sack. So this is a nice thematic tactic to try and memorize and use in one's own games. This windmill tactics created now with this discovery check with massive advantage to white. Anyway, let's go back to the final position. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave any comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.